Ladies first.
What?
Every kid wants to be Superman. But for us guys in the 90s, the only man we really idolized was Chance Boudreaux. Jean-Claude Van Damme used to be the masculine dream of a whole generation. Yancy Butler was the striking new face a lot of people could not forget. But time, or maybe Hollywood's own spotlight, wrecked everything. The one-time male idol lived on cocaine, sleeping pills, and bipolar disorder. The rising actress got pulled into Hollywood's brutal orbit. Let's look back at what happened to our idols after 33 years, because once you know, you will not want to live their lives anymore. And do not miss a second of this video, because the farther you go, the more strange little facts about the Hard Target cast I have scattered all through it. Ready. Number 1. Jean-Claude Van Damme as Chance Boudreaux. Let's start with the idol of the 90s male crowd, me and you included. Jean-Claude Camille, Francois van Varenberg, born in 1960. He played Chance Boudreaux at 33, and this year he is 66. In Hard Target, he was the absolute center, the face the studio put front and center to sell tickets, and honestly, that made perfect sense. But Van Damme's life was way more complicated and way darker than the movie that made his name. Right when he was at his most famous, he slipped into cocaine and sleeping pills. Then, in 1999, he was arrested for drunk driving in West Hollywood. Behind the image of an untouchable hero was a man losing control. The breaking point came when Van Damme was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. But the most wrecked part of Van Damme's life was his marriages. He got married 5 times and has 3 children. Honestly, his love life was way more troubled than I ever imagined for a man who once seemed to have almost everything in his hands. And what is impressive is that Van Damme did not disappear. He came back with JCVD in 2008. Reuters noted the film's appearance in Toronto, while the Los Angeles Times treated it like a confession about declined DUIS money and fading fame. This year, at 66, he is still working, and even Brussels put up a bronze statue of him back in 2012. That is the strange thing about Van Damme. His life was far messier than any of us imagined, but the shadow he left behind is still way too big to vanish. He used to be my idol at one point, but looking back now, I do not think I could handle his life. And the next person is the female lead of the movie, with a life just as troubled. Number 2. Yancy Butler as Natasha Binder. Come on, admit it. Back in the early 90s, Yancy Butler was the face that totally got to the guys who loved this movie. Yancy Victoria Butler was born in 1970. She played Natasha Binder at 23, and this year she is 56. In Hard Target, Natasha is the female lead. This was the role that brought her into the light more clearly on the big screen, and honestly, it is no surprise so many male viewers remember her from that movie. But what makes Yancy Butler's story memorable is not just that seductive look. After Hard Target, she had Drop Zone, then broke through harder with Sarah Pazzini in Witchblade, the role that got her a Saturn Award in 2002. It sounds like the kind of career path that is opening up beautifully, but the price that came with it was anything but light. Butler herself later looked back and said that stretch of time wore her down badly, with workdays that could run 19 hours, even 24 hours. Hollywood likes to call that success. The people stuck inside that machine know it feels more like being ground down. Then she ran straight into the same wreck a lot of other Hollywood stars have hit. In 2003, Butler was detained in Delray Beach for disorderly intoxication, then had to enter a substance abuse treatment program. In 2007, she was charged again with drunk driving after a car accident. By 2017, she was arrested again in Sag Harbor on charges of aggravated drunken driving and possession of drugs after being found unconscious behind the wheel. Looking back now, You realize there are faces that once had a whole generation of men mesmerized, but behind the lights was a tired, familiar Hollywood life that feels almost painfully predictable. But you know what? Yancy Butler is still hanging on to the profession through genre movies and indie films like Emerald Run Initiation, The Accursed Boogeyman, and Last Call in the Doghouse. She has not had another explosion like Hard Target, but she is still determined to stay with the work. That kind of persistence is impressive. And next, we are getting to the first supporting face who played an important role to see where he is now. Number 3. Chuck Pfarrer as Douglas Binder. The next guy was not the kind of role men back then wanted to become. He only shows up in a flash near the beginning of the movie. But the funny thing is, in real life, Chuck Pfarrer had a life that felt way more intensely masculine than a lot of the leads in Hard Target. Charles Patrick Pfarrer III was born in 1957. He played Douglas Binder at 36, and this year he is 69. In the movie, Douglas is only a key supporting role, Natasha Binder's father. What makes this especially interesting is that Pfarrer did not just play the role. He also wrote the screenplay for Hard Target. What makes Chuck Pfarrer worth talking about is not his screen time, but the life he lived before Hollywood. He grew up in a military family, went to military school, then entered the US Navy. Pfarrer served with SEAL Team 4, then moved into SEAL Team 6, and public biographies even describe him as a former assault element commander who took part in more than 150 missions in the Middle East. So the man who only appears very briefly in this movie had actually been through real war, not the kind of masculinity built under studio lights. After the military, he turned to writing, then worked on projects like Navy SEALs, Dark Man, Hard Target, The Jackal Virus, and Red Planet. The part that got the most attention later came in 2011 when his book SEAL Target Geronimo became a bestseller, but was publicly rejected by US Special Operations Command, to the point that CBS quoted military officials calling it a lie. Honestly, Douglas Binder is only a very short supporting role. But when I look at Chuck Pfarrer in real life, I see exactly the kind of hard-edged life men always imagine, only the real-life cost of it was a whole lot heavier. Now that we have gone through the 3 opening faces, I want to pause for a second. These are not big stories like scandals or awards. These are much smaller behind-the-scenes pieces, really little scraps, but they are exactly the kind of thing old movie fans love most. First off, the interesting thing is that Hard Target is tied so tightly to Van Damme, but John Woo originally wanted Kurt Russell for Chance. In the end, Universal still pushed Van Damme as the central face, and the whole process of bringing Woo into the project had to happen from Hong Kong. And once Van Damme stepped into this movie, he was definitely not the type to just stand there and let everybody else decide everything. During post-production, he actually had his own version of Hard Target cut together, trimming down some of the other characters so Chance could get more screen time and more close-ups. To put it the blunt old-school way, audiences were buying tickets to watch Van Damme. That was the very specific kind of power an early 90s action star had, and honestly, it smells exactly like the old Hollywood I still remember. And here is the detail I like most. Hard Target once had a romantic scene between Chance and Natasha, but the official release cut it out. Man, that really is a shame. I would have loved to get a moment like that between the man every guy admired and that magnetic new actress. But then again, maybe it is because the movie stayed that dry and that harsh that it became the Hard Target we still remember. And speaking of remembering now, it is time to look back at the 2 villains we used to hate with a passion and see where they are now. Number 4. Lance Henriksen as Emil Fouchon. Lance Henriksen was born on May 5, 1940. He played Emil Fouchon at 53, and this year he is 86. In Hard Target, Fouchon is the mastermind villain. When the movie came out, Henriksen was not the kind of ticket-selling star Jean-Claude Van Damme was, but he was the kind of face audiences remembered for a very long time. This role later helped him win the Saturn Award for Best Supporting Actor. But Lance Henriksen's life was much heavier than that calm exterior might suggest. His parents divorced when he was just 2. His father was a sailor and boxer who was often away, and his mother had to do all kinds of jobs to raise the children. Henriksen spent part of his childhood in foster care, said he was abused by a number of relatives, and ran away from home when he was still very young because he had had enough of that life. And trust me, this is the part that may shock you most about Henriksen. He was illiterate for years because he left school after grade 1 and could not read until around 30. When he got into acting, he had to ask friends to record his scripts so he could listen and learn the parts that way. Before becoming an actor, he worked as a muralist, did manual labor, then found his way to the stage through set design work. Later on, he kept up his art through clay work. In his private life, Henriksen has 2 publicly recorded marriages and 2 children. This year, at 86, he is still active and still a living icon of cult film science fiction and horror. Number 5. Arnold Vosloo as Pik van Cleaf. This was the most hated guy in the movie, but in real life, Arnold Vosloo has stayed pretty private. He was born on June 16, 1962, played Pik van Cleaf at 31, and this year he is 64. In Hard Target, Pik is Emil Fouchon's right-hand man. That is also what Vosloo has done really well all through his career, become the kind of villain audiences recognize by face before they remember the name. The interesting thing is that Vosloo's foundation did not start in Hollywood. He was born into a theater family in Pretoria. Both his parents were actors, and his father even ran a drive-in theater. Before coming to America, Vosloo had already made a name for himself on stage and in film in South Africa. He became a US citizen in 1988, then pretty much had to rebuild his career from scratch in a totally different environment. Vosloo's public personal life has also been much quieter than a lot of the others in this cast. He married actress Yancy Butler in 1988, and that marriage ended about 3 years later. In 1998, he married Sylvia Ahi, and the two of them were even involved together in work with the International Fund for Animal Welfare. By 2025, public reports said that marriage of nearly 27 years had ended in divorce. After Hard Target, Vosloo became even more memorable through The Mummy 24 and G.I. Joe. And in recent years, he has kept working. Interesting, right? Stick around a little longer to hear a few really memorable behind-the-scenes bits about those 2 villains themselves. So those were the 2 main villains of Hard Target. One was the cold brain sitting at the top of the hunt, the other was the right-hand man. But around those 2 villain roles are a few details people usually overlook, and the more you dig, the more interesting they get. First, Lance Henriksen. He took the role of Emil Fouchon, not just because it was a good villain part, but because he genuinely loved John Woo. Henriksen said Woo's movies were creative, had a very special rhythm, and that the violence in them felt like a shell around some bigger philosophy. Hearing that, you realize Emil Fouchon was not just some evil part he took to get through the job. It was part of a movie world Henriksen truly wanted to step into. And yeah, he really did love Woo. Henriksen said that while shooting Hard Target, John Woo set him on fire 2 times enough to burn his ear, and Henriksen still said he would do anything for Woo. That is the kind of story where you hear it once and immediately think, yeah, that sounds exactly like an old-school action movie. Arnold Vosloo, on the other hand, brought a much lighter little detail. He once admitted he looked so much like Billy Zane that when people mistook him for the guy from Titanic, sometimes he would just joke right along with it. And now, after the 2 main villains, we are moving on to the next group of actors, the supporting villains who do not appear much, but still helped turn this hunt into a real machine. Number 6. Bob Apisa as Mr. Lopacki. Bob Apisa is not the face audiences remember first when they talk about Hard Target. He played Mr. Lopacki at 48, and this year he is 81. In the movie, this is a supporting villain role. What is interesting is that in real life, Bob Apisa had a much thicker resume than a lot of people with bigger roles than his on screen. He was born on June 4, 1945, in Fagatogo, American Samoa. One of 11 siblings, then moved with his family to Oahu, Hawaii when he was still little. That starting point did not look anything like Hollywood. You may find this hard to believe, but Bob Apisa's career was tied a lot more to football than to movies. At Michigan State, he became the first Samoan player ever named. All-American was part of 2 national championship teams in 1965 and 1966, and his name is still tied to the game of the century between Michigan State and Notre Dame. But that was not a story made of glory alone. A knee injury hit his momentum hard, forced him into surgery, and made his final college years fall short of what people had first expected. He was picked by the Green Bay Packers in round 9 of the 1968 draft, but he did not last there long. Maybe that is just how a man's life goes. Sometimes everything is running beautifully, then the body is the first thing that stops it. After football, Apisa turned to acting and stunt work, then stayed with the craft for more than 33 years. He did not rise through scandal or glamour, but through a very old kind of endurance, working, showing up, then quietly making a living from the job. Later on, he was inducted into the Michigan State Athletics Hall of Fame and the Polynesian Football Hall of Fame. Number 7. Joe Warfield as Ismal Zenan. Do you remember Ismal Zenan? Joe Warfield was born on November 6, 1937, and played Ismal Zenan at 56. In Hard Target, Zenan is a supporting villain, not the mastermind like Emil Fouchon, and not the standout right-hand man like Pick Van Cleaf, but still part of the hunting side that made the whole game dirtier and more organized. What makes Joe Warfield worth talking about is not his screen time, but the fact that he gave almost his whole life to the craft. He was a 50-year veteran of theater, film, and television, working at the same time as an actor-director and acting teacher. This is the kind of resume I always find deeply admirable. Joe Warfield did not take the loud road. He stayed in the profession with real staying power, then stood behind it too, and taught other people how to act. Biographical sources also say he was once a full-time professor and head of acting study in NYU's graduate film program, while also teaching at Loyola University New Orleans, the University of New Orleans, and the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. He also won a New Orleans Stage Journal Award for directing and a Dramalogue Award for acting. Maybe the quietest thing about Joe Warfield was even the way he left. His public obituary shows a very private life, no scandal, and he passed away on November 29, 2022. Number 8. Eliott Keener as Randal Poe. Maybe not many people remember this role. Eliott Keener was born in 1949 and played Randal Poe at about 44. In Hard Target, Poe is a supporting villain, the kind of character down on the lower level of the hunt, not the one running it, but enough to make the whole thing dirtier and scarier. But the most memorable part of Eliott Keener's life was outside the screen. Playbill called Keener one of the leading actor-directors in the New Orleans theater community. He was the last surviving member of the founding faculty at the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts, acting, directing, and teaching all at once. He studied at the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point, then continued at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and the University of New Orleans. He also owned the Rose Dinner Theater in Gretna and won Big Easy Awards for Noises Off in 1986 and Other People's Money in 1992. Just that much alone is enough to show this was a man who worked deeply, solidly, and with real dignity. The sad part is that Eliott Keener left too early. He passed away on January 14, 1999, from a heart attack at only 49, while he still had future projects ahead of him, like Born Yesterday and Fiddler on the Roof. Are you curious about the story behind this trio of supporting villains? In real life, they carried three very different paths with them. One came out of top-level football, one spent nearly a whole lifetime in theater film and the classroom, and the last one became a real pillar of the New Orleans arts world. The first interesting thing is right there. On screen, they are just three supporting villains under the two main bad guys, but in real life, they were not small at all. Bob Apisa was a former Michigan State football star named first-team All-America 2 times and part of 2 national championship seasons. Joe Warfield was a man of the craft for 50 years, acting, directing, and teaching acting. And Eliott Keener was called by Playbill one of the leading actor-directors of the New Orleans stage and the last surviving founding faculty member of NOCCA. And here is the detail I like most about Bob Apisa. A lot of viewers only remember him as a supporting face in Hard Target, but before that, he had already been part of the game of the century in 1966 between Michigan State and Notre Dame, one of the most famous college football games in America. That fact alone is enough to make you see him completely differently. That is what is so great about movies like this. The deeper you dig into the smaller roles, the more you see whole lives behind them, all totally different from each other. And now, after this group of supporting villains, we are moving on to the final group of actors, the faces standing on Chance's side, meaning the support team and the good side of the movie. Number 9. Wilford Brimley as Uncle Clarence Douvee. Anthony Wilford Brimley was born on September 27, 1934. He played Uncle Douvee at 59. In Hard Target, Douvee is a heroic support role, the uncle living deep in the swamp and the final person Chance can lean on once everything starts falling apart. Brimley passed away in 2020 at 85. What makes Brimley memorable is not just the movies, but a whole life that felt very American and very old school. Before becoming an actor, he served in the United States Marine Corps, then worked all kinds of jobs like blacksmith, rodeo rider, stuntman, and extra. And there is one detail I have always found both strange and perfectly fitting for Brimley. He got typecast as America's old man way too early, to the point that a lot of people forget he was not even that old yet when those roles made him famous. In 1979, Brimley was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and he turned that disease into an important part of his public life. He spent years raising awareness about diabetes and was given a Lifetime Recognition Award by the American Diabetes Association in 2008. He lived through a long marriage with Lynn Bagley until she passed away in 2000, then married Beverly Berry in 2007. In his later years, he and his wife founded Hands Across the Saddle. Then he passed away while undergoing dialysis and dealing with multiple health conditions. And if Uncle Douvee was the most seasoned heroic support face in the movie, then the final name is a very different heroic face, the one representing the law in this hunt, Detective Marie Mitchell. Number 10. Cassie Lemmons as Detective Marie Mitchell. Cassie Lemmons was born on February 24, 1959. She played Detective Marie Mitchell at 34, and this year she is 67. In Hard Target, Marie Mitchell is a heroic support role, a female detective standing on the side of the law in a movie full of human hunters, mercenaries, and villains, cold as knives. What matters here is that Hard Target was only a small stop on her path. Lemmons grew up after her parents divorced early, studied through NYU Tisch UCLA and the film program at the New School, then later made a strong turn into writing and directing. That turn is what really separates her from the rest of this list. From Eve's Bayou to Harriet, and then Whitney Houston, I Wanna Dance with Somebody. Cassie Lemmons did not just stay in the profession, she became a creative voice with a place all her own. Right now, NYU still introduces her as an associate arts professor at Tisch. The thing about Lemmons that hits me the hardest is her family story. She once said that when her sister died, she took on the responsibility of helping raise her sister's children. She also said that black nativity saved my life during that period. I think that is what makes Kasi Lemmons the most admirable person. Here, someone who started out as a heroic supporting face in Hard Target, then lived through real loss, and finally became an artist and a guide for other people. Oh, you thought this was the end? Not yet. Before we close, I still want to share 2 interesting facts as a little reward for the people who stayed with me all the way here. First, Wilford Brimley. This is the kind of fact that still sounds unreal to me every time I hear it. When he made the natural Brimley was only about 49. That is right, only about 49. In the memory of a whole lot of Americans, he seemed to carry the face of the nation's old man way too early. So once you hear that number, you realize just how deep his image sank into pop culture. Some people do not need to try to look old on screen because audiences already believe it from the start. And with Kasi Lemmons, the detail I like most comes from PBS's Finding Your Roots. The show revealed that she is a DNA cousin of Kevin Bacon. It sounds small, but it is the kind of fun detail that feels very American, very public television, and it also makes the final heroic woman on this list feel a whole lot more familiar. So now, after all these faces and all these different turns, it really is time to close out this look back at the Hard Target cast after 33 years. Time just keeps moving. The actors get older, the audience gets older too, and somewhere along that road, who knows how many new movies showed up and disappeared. But Hard Target is different. This movie stayed. It still carries that exact smell of the era when Hollywood made action films with sweat, dirt, gunfire, and faces that only had to appear for a whole period of youth to come rushing back. To me, that is the sign of a real classic. It does not need to chase the times, and it never goes out of style. And maybe that is exactly why, after 33 years, we are still sitting here looking back at every face from this movie, every turn, every loss, every surprise time left behind. Now, it is your turn. Which character in the cast do you remember most, and what memory tied to Hard Target is still just as strong for you today? Leave a comment and share it with me. And tell me too, which movie you want us to dig back into in the next video. If you love classic movies the way I do, remember to subscribe so you do not miss these worthwhile trips back.